A blueprint for Christian thought and living. God and Satan. Welcome back to our Big Picture series. In this video, we will examine the dichotomy of essential character between God and Satan. We continue in this video using the construction of a house as an analogy to explore the overall structure of Christian thought. At the foundational level of Christian thought, we encounter the ultimate incongruity. Lucifer chose against God, the Creator. He makes this ultimate self-assertion: I will make myself like the Most High. The scope of our discussion here will elaborate on the antithesis between God and Satan, that God's inherent character is good, holy, righteous, love, and truth. And antithetically, Satan's inherent character is evil, profane, sinful, self-oriented, and the father of lies. Let's do a quick review of the comments made in our last video regarding Lucifer. Lucifer was the head of the heavenly angelic host. He was created a choosing creature. His was a simple choice regarding God's intended function. Either yes, reflect light of the Creator, acknowledge Creator dependence, or no, refuse the Creator's intended function, claiming independence. Either derive or refuse to derive. There is no alternative. Satan's self-oriented character. Where did it come from? It couldn't be derived from God, because God is love, self for others, never self for self. God can't generate selfish character. His three-person, one-being essence, essentially other, as each divine person in the singular being, is totally oriented toward the others, exists in perfect love, absolute otherness. In Lucifer's fall, we are faced with the impossible possibility. God's self-revelation in regards to Lucifer's fall is limited to texts like these. We must be very careful with conjecture as to why and how Lucifer made such a choice. Lucifer became the adversary and enemy of God. He became Satan, the evil one, the devil, the destroyer, the antithesis to God, the fixed negative to God's positive. Is Satan the result of self-creation? Did Satan create himself by his own choice of rejection? No. God is the only self-generating being, and yet even God is not self-caused or self-created, but eternal and alone self-determinative. We must remember, angels are always derivative creatures. They necessarily derive being and doing from another, from God, outside of and beyond themselves. How then did Satan's being come about? How did evil enter the world, creation of God? This is the classic question of theodicy. Satan's origin is the ultimate incongruity, the impossible possibility. Christian thinkers have always struggled to explain the introduction of evil into perfect creation. Lucifer, now Satan, like all creatures, is a derivative creature. Despite his rejective decision, he is always a derivative angelic creature. For God alone is the only self-generating being. Satan still derives from God's character, bound by the limits of his creatureliness. But here's the twist. He turns all derivation around backwards, in opposing form, reversing God's intent. Satan distorts, aborts, misuses, and abuses God's intent. He always makes crooked the straight ways of God. So again, we're considering here the essential character dichotomy between God and Satan. There is a diametric polarity and antithesis between the absolute good and perfect character of God and the absolutely evil character of the diabolical one. Evil is the absence of God's character. And again, evil is the absence of God's character. Satan is a personified ontological source of evil, an alternative derivative source of character for humanity. Evil is vested in Satan alone. Evil is personified in the evil one, just as sin is personified as crouching at the door, reigning over fallen men, as death reigns as a dynamic personified being reigning over mankind. The dilemma of fallen humanity is spiritual condition, a condition where mankind is under sin, under law, in the flesh. If evil is something man does, actuated by his own choice, and the sin effect is a result of his own self-causation, then we are the cause of our own effects. We are gods, creators creating out of nothing, both our own evil and our own righteousness. Now, regarding essential character, God's character is absolute divine perfection. Satan's character is absolutely diabolically profane, always seeking to desecrate and defile God's name and character. This is always the chief intent of Satan toward humanity, to deceive humanity regarding God's character and Satan's character. He desires God to be known falsely. He desires that he himself not be known at all, as non-existent. As any good thief, he deploys tactics of disguise, anonymity, and invisibility. Sin is all that is not rooted in God's character. anything and everything contrary to God's being of character. God's character is just, righteous, virtuous, and loving. Satan's character is continuously sinful, wicked, corrupt, nefarious, and shameful. Sin is not a mere moral or ethical concern, but more so a personified spiritual source, Satan's personage, a manifestation of his presence. The dichotomous opposite to evil and sin are love and truth. God is personally both love and truth. Both are the being of God alone, His very essence. God is love. Love is always directed toward and concerned for the other. This is the eternal orientation of God's tri-personal being. Love is the very nature of each of the three persons in the divine being of God. Love, God's character, is expressed in creating all things and maintaining all things. The opposite of love is not hate, but selfishness, self-oriented character. And again, hate is not the opposite of love, but selfishness is. This selfishness is expressed in Lucifer's original declaration of rebellious independence. I will be like the Most High God. In becoming Satan, he became the original egotist, the I specialist, the self-oriented spiritual source of all selfishness, the inherent self-serving spirit. What causes divisions within humanity is Satan's selfishness, not hatred. Hatred is an expression of selfish character, not the cause of selfishness. As God is love, so too God is truth. Truth is veracity, honesty, and integrity. These are the absolute of God's character, whereby God self-determines his own actions. God cannot lie. It's impossible for him to do so, because God is truth. Humans, acting or speaking in truthfulness, are deeds that are wrought by God. Humans cannot know or speak the truth apart from God's self-revelation and self-activation. The opposite of truth is lies. All lies fundamentally deny God's exclusivity as the inherent truth in love. Satan's objective is always to promote his self-serving lies. Satan is personally a liar and the father of lies, and has no truth in him. Satan is personally the spirit of error. Satan personally lied to Adam and Eve. His first lie is the fundamental basis of all lies. The father of lies imposed upon man the lie of independency and autonomy. And persuaded man to align with him in his self-orientation and selfishness. It was the short-circuiting of God's intent to express his character of love for others through man. Only God can know good and evil, and does so exclusively in reference to himself. God's very being self-defines everything. He doesn't know good and evil by some objective standard of goodness outside of himself. Man, being contingent and derivative, cannot be like God knowing good and evil, by defining such in terms of his own inherent character and self-activation of such. So, what the serpent suggested to the original man and woman was a lie. Actually, it was a half-truth, which is always a lie. Religion, and all humanly determined standards of morality and ethics, plays this good and evil game of self-determined standards of do's and don'ts, right and wrong, correct and incorrect. All religion and morality are merely a relativity of good and evil, whereby man seeks to relate all things to himself and make them relative to his own self-centered determinations rather than to the absolute character of God. Humanism, which spawns all religious expression and thought, espouses that something in creation, fruit of a tree, could provide what only the Creator is, truth. Satan uses religion and the idea of doing good to make people blind to the fact that these have no saving value whatever, to say nothing of spirituality. Any system of religion is satanic in nature, no matter how beautiful the package might appear to be. Satan is the author of do good. Religion is often portrayed by the devil as a mass solution to man's problem. If he can get everyone into some religion, he knows that he can keep people in some false hope, in some anesthetic, and prevent them from seeing their real need. Nothing that Satan has ever devised has been as successful as religion in blinding men's minds to the truth. Satan's primal lie calls God a liar, equates man with God, and offers wisdom, knowing good and evil, apart from God's self-revelation as the absolute truth and love. And offers strength, doing good, stopping evil, apart from God's self-activation. This resulted in man's spiritual death. So, what is spiritual death? Satan is the personification of death. He is the death dealer. Natural man cannot grasp spiritual death due to spiritual blindness. Death is not a realm or a reality created by God, who alone is the life giver, but the consequent result of rejecting God as the exclusive life for humanity. Death is the deprivation of life that can be received by the inbreathing of God's Spirit. Death assumes a pre-existent life. Death is not a spiritual non-function, but an exchange of spiritual source, a personal resource. Death is not a termination or cessation of spiritual function, but the occupation of a spirit other than God, who is life. Spiritual death is almost imperceptible. Things appear to be business as usual. God moved out. Satan moved in and masquerades as the individual human, as if we had inherent functionality ourselves, independently. God, in his being of love, will not impose himself upon those who do not want him. He won't be an unwanted resident, and he won't kick in doors, but only knocks. Death is not merely defined by our relationality to God, but equally according to Satan's occupation. Death is a deprivation and absence of a particular life function, but this doesn't create a vacuum that humanity, by self-actualizing and self-determination, can fill. Spiritual death is not a vacuum, but a person, Satan's abiding presence in humanity. Death, evil, and sin are personified in Satan as the spirit being that is the antithesis to God, who in Jesus Christ is the personified truth and reality of God. I am the truth, Jesus said, and the truth shall make you free, to be all that God intends man to be. Grace is the dynamic activity of God, whereby he effects all that he does in Jesus Christ. The whole of Christianity is the activity of God's grace. In Jesus Christ alone. Our next video will discuss the essential constitutional difference between God and man.